Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 240. Greta, what's up?
What's up? The
Usual.
Just the usual. Good. Feeling good. Enjoying a sunny day.
Okay,
It's Friday, so that's good.
that's good. Yeah.
How about you? What's up with you?
That sounds about right. I mean,
We're so original.
I wish I could, be outside and enjoy it a little more. So
I know. I was thinking about that. I wish maybe we need to figure out a way that we can record outside sometimes.
yeah,
I feel
that's
like it's
challenging.
like-
Well, it's challenging. It would be a degradation in audio quality for sure.
Yeah.
So I wasn't trying to advocate for that. I was just saying
It would be nice.
just to be when we're not recording to be able to go outside more and get stuff done during a normal work day. Anyway,
Right. I see what you're saying. Okay. I
Yes.
agree. I agree.
yes,
Yeah.
good. Glad we got that all. Glad
Yep.
we have that all cleared up.
Yep.
There we go.
Same.
Little tongue tied today for some reason. On this episode, we are continuing our journey through the History of Middle Earth series as we survey Volume 7, The Treason of Isengard, which is the second of 4 volumes dealing with the textual history of the Lord of the Rings. Yes.
Okay.
Before we get started, we'd like to give a shout out to our patrons. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, Caitlin of Tea with Tolkien, Lisa Yu, Andrew T, John R, and Ms. Anonymous. Thank you all so
Yes,
much
thank you.
for being our amazing executive producers. You too can become a patron of the Tolkien Road by visiting patreon.com/Tolkien Road. Becoming a patron lets you support the show in a tangible way and lands you some awesome perks, like audio recordings of my 2 books, Tolkien's Requiem and Tolkien's Overture. Check it out now to learn more about all of the exciting perks we offer, and don't forget you can now make an annual pledge and get 1 month free. Also, remember to subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes / Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you use. Any feedback that you can give us, especially of the 5-star highest rating variety, is greatly appreciated. And going ahead and writing us a short review telling us what you appreciate about it when you leave that 5-star rating that's like really does the trick, really helps, right? So just doing a little bit of extra work there can help us out a lot, and we always love hearing from you guys, especially when we get awesome feedback like this one from April 25th. This is from Luke Spooner. Amazing podcast to run to. What do you think of that, Greta?
Yeah. When you shared this with me, I was like, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I mean, I like to run.
Yeah.
But I can't run and listen to words. I need music.
Well, Luke explains. Here's what he says. He says, "This podcast is a fantastic mix combining the scholarly portion of Tolkien, but also keeping it fun and finding the right balance. I really don't understand how anybody could leave a 1-star review and actually mean it. I don't either. Just gotta say.
One thing we have in common with Luke.
I am 16 years old and I am a long-distance trail runner. Every time I go for a run, it has turned into a habit to throw on this podcast, and it just takes my mind off the run for 1, 2, or even 3 hours straight.
Wow.
I am slightly disappointed that I took so long to find this podcast, but it is also a gift because now I have what seems like an endless treasure trove of running listening."
Whoa.
That's awesome.
That's fantastic.
I would have never imagined because I think Luke must be a really good runner, right? I mean, first of all, he's a long distance trail runner, so
And trail running is hard.
Trail running is hard. Trail running is definitely harder than most normal running, as far as I'm concerned. But I also have to say that I'm not a very good runner, and nor do I like running a whole lot. So I need motivational music to make me feel good about running, right? And once I get in the groove and I'm listening to some music, it makes me feel pretty good. But if I was going for a run any longer than 2 or 3 minutes, I would not be able to listen to a podcast or anything like that.
Yeah.
There's a commercial a long time ago for, I think maybe it was for Audible or something like that, and it was a guy starts running and he begins listening to Moby Dick, and then the whole thing is he finished they shows him running through different places, and then and then he finishes Moby Dick, and so the whole thing is during the run, and so the whole thing is he was running forever, right? Because Moby Dick is really long. I just can't. That's awesome that you're able to do that, and it's all. You must be a really good runner because for me, I need like music to get me pumped up and fired up for the run.
I'm the same way, and I
yeah.
actually enjoy running.
Yeah, Greta runs a lot. Yeah,
but I still need music.
Yeah,
because it you know, that's just me. But I love that this works for Luke.
Me too.
I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I don't know, maybe Luke's review here of Amazing Podcast to Run To will open up a whole new demographic of people who run and listen to podcasts for us. So
yeah, that would be fantastic.
It's some epic listening, I'll tell you that for sure. So
yeah, well, you know, we do have the awesome opening music.
We do. Well, that's pretty. Yeah, that gets you. That can get you fired up.
That can get you fired up.
Yeah,
and just kind of get you off on the right foot.
Yeah, maybe he just repeats those like 30 seconds.
This was the opening on repeat.
Well, Luke, it's great hearing from you, and thank you so much for your review and your kind words, and that 5-star review. So everybody, be like Luke. If not with the running, leaving us a 5-star review and saying awesome things about us.
Yes, please.
All right, and don't forget to check us out on YouTube as well, tolkienroad.com/YouTube. Getting new videos up there, and we're also now posting all of our podcast episodes, our new podcast episodes, up to YouTube as well. So it's one other place that you can watch, or listen. You can have it on and listen in the background, right? All right, Greta, ready to explore the Treason of Isengard?
You know I am.
All right, well, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
The Treason of Isengard is the 7th volume in the History of Middle-earth series and the 2nd volume in the subset collectively known as The History of the Lord of the Rings. It was published in 1989. On episode 239, we surveyed The Return of the Shadow, which deals with the genesis of the story originally known as The New Hobbit, but known now to the world as The Lord of the Rings. While The Return of the Shadow essentially focused on the development of the plot from Bilbo's birthday party to the Fellowship's journey south from Rivendell into Moria, The Treason of Isengard begins with Tolkien's 4th phase of revisions to the early chapters and concludes with the early version of the King of the Golden Hall. Right, so he's making significant progress. Basically, is past in terms of the plot, past just Fellowship at this point, and or winds up past Fellowship by the end of what we have in the Treason of Isengard. So when considering this volume, I like this Tolkien quote from a 1956 letter. So this is, I'm looking at this from the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien.
We're all waiting with bated breath.
Yeah. Wait, I should be looking in the Treason of Isengard. I confused myself because I said it's from a letter, but there is something else I want to read from the letters. But anyway, let's see. So wait a minute. Oh yeah, here we go. Got it. Found it. Phew. Thought there was gonna be a big gaffe there.
I was thinking to myself, is this editable?
No, we don't do that here. Oh. We don't do any of that editing business here.
What you hear is what you get.
You get it in the raw.
That's right.
All right, here we go. Tolkien in 1956 wrote this: "I have long ceased to invent. I wait till I seem to know what really happened, or till it writes itself. Thus, though I knew for years that Frodo would run into a tree adventure somewhere far down the great river, I have no recollection of inventing Ents. I came at last to the point and wrote the Treebeard chapter without any recollection of previous thought, just as it now is." So I like that quote because he insists that he doesn't invent his stories, right? And you can see that all throughout here. And I think what he means by that is he's not like kind of forcing himself to come up with things, right, out of thin air. I think writing became for him over time like a very organic process, right? He was thinking about these things like they were really happening, right, somewhere. And I think he was just trying to make sure that he didn't force the issue, right? Force his creativity. Now, the drawback for that is that as Tolkien fans, that means we have, a lot less books published by him over his lifetime than, maybe a lot of other authors out there. But I can also appreciate that gives that the quality of uh, that improves the quality of work, I guess you could say, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I just like that notion that he's just kind of like, again, he's he's discovering these things, right, as he goes. He didn't set out being with as we said on the last episode, he didn't set out with like you know, a short treatment of where the story was going, of the plot of Lord of the Rings, right? He didn't even know that Bilbo's ring, right, the ring he had taken from Gollum or in The Hobbit, he didn't even realize that ring was going to be so significant when he started writing Lord of the Rings, right? So that just tells you about a little bit more about his process, and probably why we have so many, 4 volumes of just writings from, from his development. So anyway, I thought that was cool.
That is. That's really cool.
All right, I'll begin our survey by giving an overview of the table of contents. So this volume consists of 26 chapters. All right. So the chapters are Chapter 1, Gandalf's Delay. Chapter 2, the fourth phase, from Hobbiton to Bree. Chapter 3, the fourth phase, from Bree to the Ford of Rivendell. Chapter 4, of Hamilkar, Gandalf, and Saruman. Chapter 5, Bilbo's Song at Rivendell, Errantry, and Earendalenway. Chapter 6, The Council of Elrond, Version 1. Chapter 7, The Council of Elrond, Version 2. Chapter 8, The Ring Goes South. Chapter 9, The Mines of Moria 1, The Lord of Moria. Chapter 10, The Mines of Moria 2, The Bridge. Chapter 11, The Story Foreseen from Moria. Chapter 12, Lothlorien. Chapter 13, Galadriel. Chapter 14, Farewell to Lorien. Chapter 15, The First Map of the Lord of the Rings. Chapter 16, The Story Foreseen from Lorien. Chapter 17, The Great River. Chapter 18, The Breaking of the Fellowship. Chapter 19, The Departure of Boromir. Chapter 20, The Riders of Rohan. Chapter 21, The Uruk-hai. Chapter 22, Treebeard. Chapter 23, Notes on Various Topics. Chapter 24, The White Rider. Chapter 25, The Story Foreseen from Fangorn. And Chapter 26, The King of the Golden Hall. And then there's also an appendix on runes, as well as 15 listings of illustrations. Of special interest with the illustrations are the numerous instances of the development of the map. As we saw with the chapters, Chapter 15 deals specifically with the development of this first Lord of the Rings map. So he was getting far enough to where he wanted to start putting all of this down on a map and having some semblance of order to it in a visual sense. But one of the things that stands out to me about the table of contents is that it's starting to kind of flow a little more, I guess. Mm-hmm. Like he seems to be making a little more progress now that he's past. Really getting past Rivendell. So, so, maybe it was all starting to come into a little more focus for him, right? Yeah. Having to make decisions and, continue to develop. But we're still going to see that a lot of stuff he still hasn't figured out at different stages in this story. So, that's some of the, I guess that's some of the, what makes this volume interesting is seeing those sorts of things. All right. So let's take a look at Christopher Tolkien's foreword. Christopher begins by explaining the seemingly arbitrary nature of the division of these different volumes. At the beginning of the foreword, he says, "In the history of Middle-earth, I have tried to make each book as much an independent entity as possible, and not merely a section cut off when the book had reached a certain size. But in the history of the writing of The Lord of the Rings, this has proved difficult. In The Return of the Shadow, I was able to bring the story to the point where my father, as he said, halted for a long while the company of the ring stood before the tomb of Balin in the mines of Khazad-dûm. But this meant leaving till later the further complex restructurings of earlier parts of the Fellowship of the Ring that belongs to that period." So he's basically just telling us like why he's dividing these different. Like one might wonder like why didn't he do like just 3 volumes and have volume 1 be on the Fellowship, volume 2 be on the Two Towers, and volume 3 being on the Return of the King. And partly it's just because that's not exactly how his father proceeded in writing these things. He had to make a decision at some point to cut it off, or it would have been humongous, right? It would have been, much larger than a, 1 volume copy of the Lord of the Rings. So, he goes on to speak about the title. So why the Treason of Isengard? And here's my letter snippet that I was searching for earlier. Christopher refers to a 1953 letter from his father to Rayner Unwin. There we read, Um, let's see. I didn't do a good job of referencing it though. Okay, wait. I had bad notes. Here we go. Bad note taking this time. All right. Normally I'm just fooling around with the one book, but I decided to go over here to the letters this time. Must have jumped into the Waldman letter. Yeah. Wait, here we go. I had it bookmarked. There we go. Sheesh. All right. P.S. I have given some thought to the matter of subtitles for the volumes which you thought were desirable. But I do not find it easy, as the books, though they must be grouped in pairs, are not really paired, and the middle pair are not really related. Would it not do if the book titles were used? For example, The Lord of the Rings, Volume 1, The Ring Sets Out and The Ring Goes South. Volume 2, The Treason of Isengard and The Ring Goes East. And Volume 3, The War of the Ring and the End of the Third Age. If not, I can at the moment think of nothing better than Volume 1, The Shadow Grows. Volume 2, The Ring and the Shadow. And Volume 3, The War of the Ring or The Return of the King. I'm glad he didn't stick with with any of those. I liked The Return of the Shadow, thinking of the Fellowship as being titled The Return of the Shadow. I'm not a fan of like The Shadow Grows. I don't know, just that verb is not a very like compelling verb to me.
Grows, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels kind of like episode 7 of the Star Wars sequel trilogy. The Force Awakens. I just remember when they announced that, I was like, just doesn't feel good. Like, don't like that title, man. Had no idea whether I'd like the movie or not, but it's just, I don't know. There's just something about the ordering of the words, like the thing does something, like it just doesn't.
It's not very inspired.
Yeah, it doesn't have the same feel of the Return of the Shadow, right? That sounds more like, or the Return of the King, or even the War of the Ring. That there's just something that sounds a little more epic.
Yeah.
I don't know. You can call it a matter of preference, but there's something about it to me. So anyway, Treason of Isengard. That's a pretty cool title. I like that, and it would have been interesting to see if that if that had become the title of the second volume itself. But anyway, that's why Christopher chose The Treason of Isengard for the title of this volume. And then, so why stop with The King of the Golden Hall? That's another question that Christopher addresses in here. He says, finally, I decided that The King of the Golden Hall does in fact provide a very suitable stopping place, not in terms of the movement of composition, but in terms of the movement of the story. And I have retained the title, The Treason of Isengard, because that has the central new element in this part of The Lord of the Rings. Even though in this book the account of the destruction of Isengard and the reward of Saruman's betrayal is only reached in a preliminary outline. So yeah, and then he goes on. He begins this volume by going back to the earlier chapters of Fellowship. Why he does that, he says this. The way in which The Return of the Shadow was constructed has meant that the first part of The Treason of Isengard must deal at some length with further developments in the Fellowship of the Ring up to the point reached in the first book. And this part is of necessity a continuation of the account and The Return of the Shadow, and stands in very close relation to it, though most of the many page references made to it are no more than references and need not be looked up in order to follow the discussion. So, there you go.
Yeah, there we go.
All right. So, are you completely lost yet, Greta?
What makes you ask that?
Sorry. Yeah, as we've said before with this series, it gets pretty academic, right? And even though we're just doing a survey, this is you can tell that the history of Middle-earth is for the hardcore Tolkien fans. So congratulations. If you've made it this far, then there's no doubt in my mind that you can consider yourself a truly hardcore Tolkien fan, right? You have to be a lover of Tolkien to dig the history of Middle-earth.
I think you can still be a lover of Tolkien and not dig this.
Well, I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying that if you have made it this far, then there's no doubt about it, right? No one
I
can
see.
argue with
I
argue
see.
with you.
It can never be questioned.
Right.
Your devotion.
Your love of
Yeah.
Tolkien
Got it.
cannot be
I
questioned
think
at this
that's
point.
fair. That's fair.
That's right. So,
Yeah.
congratulations. Boom. All right. So, as with any single volume in the History of Middle-earth series, a thorough discussion would take up at least as many episodes as there are chapters. So instead, let's look at some highlights from this volume. So the first one I highlighted was from, I believe it was chapter 4, Gandalf, and this has to do. So I'll say this: the contents, when I read them, a lot of it probably sounded pretty familiar to you, but there was a couple of things that stood out. One of them was the name Hamilkar. So chapter 4 is titled of Hamilkar, Gandalf, and Saruman, right? So who is Hamilkar? I don't remember that name at all from Lord of the Rings. So that's what we're going to find out. Gandalf rescues Hamilkar. Think of this as a deleted scene. One character that never made it into the finished text was Hamilkar Bolger. There is a snippet that Christopher gives in chapter 4 that shows Gandalf rescuing him from the Black Riders. I'm going to...
Wait, is that Fatty Bulger?
Well, no, his name may have changed to that at some point, but
there was a Fatty Bulger.
But there was a Fatty Bulger, but I'm saying like there was no Hamilkar Bulger, and there's this scene that resembles something of that of what happens with Fatty,
Okay.
but it's a little different. So there's actually I would definitely call this like a deleted scene, right? All right, so here goes. In the fourth phase version of A Knife in the Dark, the story of the attack on Crick Hollow took this form. The Black Riders carried Hamilkar Bolger out of the house as an inert bundle, and as they rode away, another horse came thundering along the lane. As it passed the gate, a horn rang out. I noted that this story belongs with what is said in the time scheme D. Riders, which is riders attack Crick Hollow and carry off Ham, pursued by Gandalf. A very rough manuscript written on the August 1940 examination script described above gives a version of the event as recounted later at Rivendell by Gandalf and Hamilkar Bolger. This text takes up at the point where Frodo, leaving his bedroom at Rivendell, goes down and finds his friends in the porch. But I do not think that anything has been lost before this point. It was a particular passage of the Many Meetings chapter rewritten to introduce the new story. All right, so here is the actual deleted scene. There seemed to be 3 hobbits sitting there with Gandalf. "Hooray!" cried one of them, springing up. "Here comes our noble cousin." It was Hamilkar Bolger. "Ham!" cried Frodo, astounded. "How did you come here, and why?" Let me say, too, I'm almost positive, if you had asked me, I would say there's no way, like, Fatty wasn't at the Council of Elrond. He didn't come to Rivendell, right? So
True.
if this is indeed him, the character that became Fatty Bolger, then he's definitely in a place where he never came in the actual Lord of the Rings. All right, moving on. He says, Ham responds, "On horseback, and representing Mr. F. Baggins of Crick Hollow and late of Hobbiton," answered Ham. Merry laughed. "Yes," he said, "we told him so, but he didn't believe it. We left poor old Ham in a dangerous post. As soon as the Black Riders had found Crick Hollow, where Mr. Baggins was popularly supposed to be residing, they attacked it." "When did that happen?" asked Frodo. "Before dawn on Friday morning, 4 days nearly after you left," said Ham. "They got me." He paused and shuddered, but Gandalf came in the nick of time. "Not quite the nick," said Gandalf. "A notch or 2 behind, I am afraid. 2 of the riders must have crept into Buckland secretly, while a third took the horses down the other side of the river inside the Shire. They stole the ferry boat from the Buckland shore on Thursday night, and got their horses over. I arrived too late, just as they reached the other side. Galarok had to swim the river. Then I had a hard chase, but I caught them 10 miles beyond the bridge. I have one advantage. There is no horse in Mordor or in Rohan that is as swift as Galarok. When they heard his feet behind them, they were terrified. They thought I was somewhere else, far away. I was terrified too, I may say. I thought it was Frodo they had got." "Yes," said Hamilkar with a laugh. He did not know whether he was relieved or disgusted when he found it was only poor old Ham Bolger. "I was too crushed to mind at the time. He bowled the rider that was carrying me clean over. But I feel rather hurt now." "You are perfectly well now," said Gandalf, "and you have had a free ride all the way to Rivendell, which you would never have seen if you had been left to your own sluggishness. Still, you have been useful in your way." He turned to Frodo. "It was from Ham that I heard you had gone into the old forest," he said, and that filled me with fresh anxiety. I turned off the road at once and went immediately to visit Bombadil. That seems to have proved lucky, for I believe the 3 riders reported that Gandalf and Baggins had ridden east. Their chieftain was at Amroth, far down the Greenway in the south, and the news must have reached him late on Friday. I fancy the chief rider was sorely puzzled with the advance guard reported that Baggins and the Ring had been in Bree that very night, when they thought they had caught him in Crick Hollow. Some riders seem to have been sent straight across country to Weathertop. 5 came roaring along the road. I was safe back at the pony where they passed through Bree on Saturday night, or when they passed through Bree on Saturday night. They leaped the gates and went through like a howling wind. The Breelanders are still shivering and wondering what is happening to the world. I left Bree next morning and rode day and night behind them, and we reached Weathertop on the evening of the 3rd. So Sam was right, said Frodo. Yes, sir, seemingly, said Sam, feeling rather pleased, but Gandalf frowned at the interruption. We found 2 riders already watching Weathertop, he went on. Others soon gathered round, returning from the pursuit further east along the road. Ham and I passed a very bad night besieged on the top of Weathertop, but they dared not attack me in the daylight. In the morning we slipped away northwards into the wilds. Several pursued us. 2 followed us right up to the Horwell into the Intish lands. That is why they were not in full force when you arrived, and did not observe you at once. All right, so that's this deleted scene that in kind of a little snippet of plot that wasn't included, where Gandalf rescues this character Hamilkar Bolger and brings him with him. He rescues him from Black Riders and then brings him with him to Rivendell. So anyway, that's kind of cool. There's definitely more on there's more on this in here. So for those of you who are intrigued by that, it's something you'll want to check out. Next highlight I've got is introducing Saruman. Right. So we also find in Chapter 4 notes dating to August 1940 that seem to be the first appearance of Saruman. Of this, Christopher writes, "This is very probably the first appearance of Saruman, also named at this point Sauramond and Sauramund, who steps into the narrative quite unheralded. But he enters at once as a wizard whose aid Gandalf seeks, and who has fallen and gone over to Sauron. Moreover, he dwells at Angrobel or Irongarth, and compare with Isengard, on the borders of Rohan. But my father was still quite uncertain what happened to Gandalf, having rejected the story of the Western Tower. The possibilities suggested here show that the imprisonment in a tower had been for the moment abandoned. Giant Fangorn or Treebeard again appears as a hostile being." So we still have Treebeard as a hostile being here as Saruman appears for the first time. We have, instead of Isengard, we have Irongarth. So, nifty name. Probably Isengard's a little better, I think. But again, one of the cool things is the development of names. Mm-hmm. Another highlight, a little later on in the book, about 100 pages later, is the early Balrog description. Right, so one of everybody's favorite Tolkien debate topics. About the nature of Balrogs and what they look like. We have the first appearance of the Balrog at the Bridge of Khazad-dûm. So you want to read this, Greta?
Sure.
Let people hear your lovely voice.
I know. I've been trying to think of things to say.
I know it's tough, like with this stuff, right? Because I don't know. It's that kind of heavy, like, academic nature of this one that it's a little bit. It can be a little hard to engage with.
It can. Maybe it's just better that I sit and absorb. Nothing wrong with that.
All good.
All right, here we go. Legolas bent his bow. Then he let it fall. He gave a cry of dismay and terror. 2 great dark troll shapes had appeared, but it was not these that caused his cry. The orc ranks had opened as if they themselves were afraid. A figure strode to the fissure, no more than man-high, yet terror seemed to go before it. They could see the furnace fire of its yellow eyes from afar. Its arms were very long. It had a red tongue. That's in brackets.
Yeah, I think that just means he's not 100% sure
he's
what
not
that
sure.
word is.
Okay, that's why the question mark. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe it had a red tongue. Through the air, it sprang over the fiery fissure. The flames leaped up to greet it and wreathed about it. Its streaming hair seemed to catch fire, and the sword that it held turned to flame. In its other hand it held a whip of many thongs. Aye, aye, wailed Legolas. The the Balrogs.
I would leave out the
Oh,
bracketed
leave
part.
out the
Yeah.
brackets. Okay. Aye, aye, wailed Legolas. A Balrog is come. A Balrog, said Gandalf. What evil fortune! And my power is nearly spent. The fiery figure ran across the floor. The orcs yelled and shot many arrows. Over the bridge, cried Gandalf. Go on, go on. This is a foe beyond any of you. I will hold the bridge. Go on. When they gained the door, they turned, in spite of his command. The troll figure strode across the fire, carrying orcs across. The Balrog rushed to the bridge door. Legolas
To the bridge foot.
raised... Huh?
Rush to the bridge foot.
Oh, yeah. The Balrog rushed to the bridge foot. Legolas raised his bow, and an arrow pierced his shoulder. The bow fell, useless. Gandalf stood in the midst of the bridge. In his hand, Glamdring gleamed. In his left, he held up his staff. The Balrog advanced and stood gazing at him. Suddenly, with a spout of flame, it sprang on the bridge. But Gandalf stood firm. You cannot pass, he said. Go back. Struck out, probably as soon as written, into the fiery depths. It is forbidden for any Balrog to come beneath the sky, since Finonwe, son of Manwe, overthrew Thangordrim. I am the master of the White Fire. The red flame cannot come this way. The creature made no reply, but standing up tall, so that it loomed above the wizard, it strode forward and smote him. A sheet of white flame sprang before him, and the Balrog fell backward. Its sword shivered into molten pieces and flew, but Gandalf's staff snapped and fell from his hand. With a gasping hiss, the Balrog sprang up. It seemed to be half blind, but it came on and grasped at the wizard. Glamdring shore off its empty right hand, but in that instant, as he delivered the stroke, the Balrog struck with its whip. The thongs lashed round the wizard's knees, and he staggered.
Yeah, so there's a lot more for that one too, but first appearance, right? Tolkien going along, I guess, probably discovering the Balrog, although I'm not sure if he would have written about Balrogs before. I think it does talk about that in here because, of course, there's a Balrog in at least one makes an appearance in the Silmarillion, and I'm pretty sure that story, the early forms of that story would have predated, or if that scene with the Balrog would have predated the writing of the Lord of the Rings. So, but we get really the description of what we would later come to know as Durin's Bane, right? Furnace fire, yellow eyes. Furnace fire with its yellow eyes from afar. Its arms were very long. It had a red tongue. Got to know the color of its tongue.
All right.
And then it's interesting to me. It's streaming. It has streaming hair, right? So you kind of think of it as like you wouldn't think of this thing having hair. I don't know in the way I've envisioned it before, but anyway. So I think it would go on to have a little bit more development. The description of the Balrog, but that's here's the first appearance of it within the Lord of the Rings. So interesting little snippet there.
Definitely.
I also noted that in speaking of the flame, being the wielder of the I always forget what Gandalf says there, but he doesn't speak of a white flame, right? He speaks of something more mysterious. He doesn't call it's not the flame of Anor, but anyway. But he just speaks of it as the white flame here. So, but overall, again, seems to, be pretty close to the final version.
Yes.
With that one.
Yeah. It's definitely a memorable scene.
Yeah, for sure. Next thing highlighted is from chapter 11. And there's a couple of chapters in this volume that are the story foreseen from here. And I think these are pretty interesting chapters because we can kind of see Tolkien just taking notes at different junctures on where he thinks the story is going to go. So I enjoy those the most of all, right? I like seeing Tolkien thinking on paper, not necessarily just the long descriptions and everything, but just thinking okay, where is this going from here, and seeing the plot develop in his own mind. In this chapter 11, the story foreseen from Moria, it's a fun short chapter that really serves as a sketch, and gives us some higher level thoughts. So first of all, he lays out a possible endgame from Moria, right? So he has this to say about a possible endgame. Basically, to summarize this, they go direct to Mount Doom. Gollum and Sam plunge with the ring into the abyss. So I read that. I'm actually not going to read the whole thing he's got here, but that's the gist of it. And it's not 100% clear. It sounds from that like Sam would die. Like Sam would die with Gollum, right? By they wrestle and plunge into the ring with the ring into the abyss, right? But it doesn't say clearly. He basically says right after that. He said, "Function for Sam is he to die?" Or something. So he at one point he did think about that Sam might die, right, in destroying the ring.
Interesting.
So yeah,
that's really interesting.
I'm
glad he changed his mind though.
Oh, I am too. And then he goes on to say this. He goes on to say, Sam could get hold of the ring. Frodo betrayed by Gollum and taken by orcs to Minas Morgul. They take his ring and find it is no good. They put him in a dungeon and threaten to send him to Barad-dûr. So we have kind of the early sketch of the Cirith Ungol scene, right, where Sam has to go into Cirith Ungol and rescue Frodo. So with the ring, we also have the appearance of a spiders with this, right? So with
that's in the book, right?
Yeah, right,
that's
right.
Where,
yeah. So, but at this point, it's spiders. So what he says is that Gollum, he's trying to figure out like how does Frodo like fall asleep and get dragged off by the orcs at the pass, right? And he says he draws his sword. Gollum tries to utter horrible words over Frodo, incantations of sleep, a spider charm, or does Gollum get spiders' help? There is a ravine, a spider's glen. They have to pass at entrance to Gorgoroth. Gollum gets spiders to put spell of sleep on Frodo. Sam drives them off, but cannot wake him. He then gets idea of taking ring. He sits beside Frodo. Gollum betrays Frodo to the orc guard. They are overwhelmed, and Sam knocked silly with a club. He puts on ring and follows Frodo. So it's interesting that it's spiders at this point, and they just put some kind of spider charm on Frodo to make him fall asleep. So he hasn't arrived at the single giant spider of Shelob just yet. But.
Okay, can I just ask real quick?
Yeah.
So this is post Silmarillion.
Right.
Right? So that's surprising to me that because Ungoliant is in the Silmarillion.
Right.
Right? So it's surprising to me that he wouldn't have just been like, oh, we need a descendant of Ungoliant in this book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's strange to me that he would have done this charm of many spiders before thinking about putting one giant spider in there.
Well, I think he envisioned because remember he had already dealt with giant spiders in The Hobbit.
Right.
And I think he was making the connection that they would be, by this point, they would be descendants of Ungoliant, right?
Okay.
Which Shelob is, right?
But he hasn't conceived of Shelob at this point.
Not by that name, and not as a single spider, and none of the lore associated with her.
Gotcha.
So.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. All right. And then he basically, and we also see him expanding the scope of the plot to include some kind of meanwhile action. So he says the story turns for a while to the others after first meeting of Sam, Frodo, and Gollum. Owing to Boromir's treachery and Frodo's use of ring, the hunt fails. Aragorn is overwhelmed with grief, thinking he has failed trust as Gandalf's successor. Merry and Pippin are distracted by losing Sam and Frodo and wandering far, deluded by echoes. They also get lost. Merry and Pippin come up Entwash into Fangorn and have adventure with Treebeard. Treebeard turns out a decent giant. They tell him their tale. He is very perturbed by news of Saruman and more so by the fall of Gandalf. He won't go near Mordor. He offers to carry them to Rohan and perhaps Minas Tirith. They set off. So finally, Treebeard's starting to turn into a good guy here.
Phew.
Yeah. So.
Good.
All right. There's also the story foreseen from Lorien. So he did another one of these chapters a little later, and that's chapter 16. One of the things we see in that chapter is Boromir's fate. So early on, there is no hint that Boromir would die at the hand of the orcs at Amon Hen. Instead, Tolkien has this to say, which is, I think, kind of interesting. He says, remember, and he's kind of, these are not like, this is not like normal prose writing. These are kind of like this is note writing. Dismay of the hunt at finding no trace of Frodo. Boromir, Legolas, Gimli, Trotter return to camp, only to find now that Sam also is missing, and Pippin and Merry as well. Trotter is overwhelmed with grief, thinking that he has failed in his charge as Gandalf's successor. He imagines that the hobbits are all together and waits in camp until the morning. In the morning, no sign is found of them. The company is now broken. Trotter sees nothing for it but to go south to Minas Tirith with Boromir. But Legolas and Gimli have no further heart for the quest, and feel that already too many leagues are between them and their homes. They go north again, Legolas remaining to join the elves of Lothlorien for a while, Gimli hoping to get back to the mountain. So, in this scenario, Boromir wouldn't have died, but would have gone with Trotter to Minas Tirith, right? So the death of Boromir doesn't, the decision to kill off Boromir doesn't come until a little bit later. There's also a good deal more regarding the endgame of Frodo's journey in this chapter, and we see that though Shelob has not yet been identified by name, there are actually many large spiders on the pass for Sam and Frodo. To contend with. And then the last highlight I wanted to bring out was really this discovering Treebeard. So, Treebeard has already come up in a couple of places, but earlier on he was kind of early formed in this mysterious figure that Tolkien just kind of dreamed out of nowhere, and he wasn't really sure where he fit into the story entirely, or even whether he was a good guy up until very recently, right? And he, in chapter 22, he really develops the story with Treebeard and what happens with him. He emerges mysteriously for Tolkien in writing Lord of the Rings, and it's chapter 22 that we really see him come into focus. So I'll read a little bit of this. And again, this is note speak. Did first Lord of the Elves make tree folk in order to, or through trying to understand trees? Gimli and Legolas to go with Trotter and Boromir. It must be Merry and Pippin who find Gandalf. Notes for Treebeard. In some ways rather stupid. Are the tree folk lone walkers, canal, that have gone tree-like, or trees that have become canal? Treebeard must be moveless. But here are some notes. First, there are very few left. Not enough room. Time was when a fellow could walk and sing all day and hear no more than the echo of his voice in the mountains. Difference between trolls. Stone inhabited by goblin spirit, stone giants, and the tree folk. Treebeard, and that's an interesting little note, right? So the trolls are stone inhabited by goblin spirit. They're the stone giants, which makes you think of the giants from the Hobbit, the stone giants from the mountain pass in the Hobbit. Maybe those were just trolls, right? Treebeard is anxious for news. He never hears much, but he smells things in the air, prefers breath from south and west of the sea. Too much east wind these days. He is bothered about Saruman, a machine-minded man, fondest of Gandalf, very upset at news of his fall. Only one of the wizards who understood trees. Tells how the horse masters have ridden away south, leaving land empty. There are only 3 of us left, myself and Skinbark and Leaflock. Saruman has got hold of Skinbark. He went off to Isengard some time ago. Leaflock has gone tree-ish. He seldom comes into the hills, has taken to standing half asleep all through the summer with the deep grass of the meadows round his knees. Covered with leaves he is, wakes up a bit in winter. Maybe somewhere about. Treebeard offers to take them across Rohan to or towards Minas Tirith. Treebeard smells war. They see a battle of wolf riders and the horse masters, wild flowing hair and little bows. Little brows, yeah. How do they meet Gandalf? It should really be Sam or Frodo, who saw vision in the mirror of Galadriel. A possible return of Gandalf would be as an old bent beggar with a battered hat coming to gates of Minas Tirith. He is let in. After, at siege's darkest hour, when outer walls have fallen, he throws off cloak and stands up, white. He leads sortie, or he comes with horses of Rohan, riding on Shadowfax. Another possibility, cut out rescue of Frodo by Sam. Let Sam get lost and meet Gandalf and have adventures getting into Minas Tirith. But it was Frodo saw vision of Gandalf. Also, Sam saw vision of Frodo lying under dark cliff, pale, and of himself on a winding stair. The winding stair must be cut in rocks and go up from Gorgoroth to Watchtower. Cut out Minas Morgul. I love the little bit about Sam gets lost, meets up with Gandalf, and Sam and Gandalf have adventures getting into Minas Tirith, right? That one was, of course, left out, but
Yeah,
I don't know.
that would have been cool.
Yeah, it might have been fun to have Sam and Gandalf, like, kind of together and teaming up, but it was, I think we got the best possible version of
Well, yeah.
how it ended with Sam.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so, well, those are some of the highlights in this volume. I mean, there's a lot in here again, very thick. You can kind of see it if you're watching on the, watching us. Yeah, it's a big volume. I'm sure there's so much more cool stuff in there that I haven't glimpsed at yet. But those were some of the things that stuck out to me from my surveying it. Of course, there's plenty of stuff about the early development of Galadriel, Celeborn, the Rohirrim, and the further honing of the main plot points. So it's dwarvish work to be sure, but there are plenty of gems to be discovered.
Oh, clever. I like that.
All right, Greta. So,
Sean.
Let's talk about some correspondence.
Oh.
We have a couple of emails.
Okay.
The first is from Marilyn Librarian on May 1st. Some bits and pieces. Hello, Carswells. I enjoyed being reminded of the father-son pairings that were part of the early stages of Numenor. But wait, there's more. When you get to the volume Sauron Defeated, you will find the Notion Club papers, which is even more unlike what we mostly know of Tolkien's writing. It was another stage of development and one eventually led to the story we now know as the Akalabaith. It might be fun to do an episode or a series of episodes comparing the three writings. And you were right. The Númenóreans couldn't go to Tol Eressëa in the final version of the tale, though the elves could and did still come to visit them from there. Yes, Thu was an early version of Sauron. See some of the earliest Luthien texts for more references to him. You might be interested to know that someone has taken up the task of writing a version of the Silmarillion that he can read to his children. He called it the Simple Silmarillion, and it comes up when you search just that.
Oh.
And then she says, finally, a live stream YouTube discussion episode sounds like a lot of fun. Keep us posted.
Cool.
Will do. Yeah, we're hoping to do that. Hoping to do that fairly soon. But I thought Thu was the early name of Sauron. That Simple Silmarillion sounds interesting.
Sounds right up my alley.
Right. Maybe a lot of our listeners too. So maybe people Google that, check it out. I feel like the Notion Club papers have the least exciting title of any of the stuff in any of this, I think. But I feel like from what I understand of it, it's actually maybe some of the most interesting stuff. It's actually really interesting stuff. So unfortunately, it has an unfortunately uninteresting name, but it might be really interesting. So we will get to that, I suppose, here soon in Sauron Defeated, which I think is 2 volumes away for us at this point. Marilyn, always nice to hear from you.
Yes, indeed.
Thanks for writing.
Yeah, thanks.
Our next note is from Brielle. I believe I'm saying Brielle's name right. Brielle says, "Hi, John and Greta. I just started listening to the podcast recently. I've got a huge backlog to learn though, but I'm nearly up to date with your History of Middle-earth series. Really been enjoying it so far." Great. Glad to hear it.
Yes.
I had a bit of an idea regarding a frame narrative for the Silmarillion. Since in the Red Book this was meant to be Bilbo's translations, perhaps it would work to have the very scant frame on each section, nothing but the source and translator. They don't all have to be by Bilbo. And some translation notes to give some hobbitish thoughts. I like that, yeah. It doesn't have to be super complicated. Part of me likes the more expansive framework, just to give us more about hobbits and some of our favorite characters and make it more relatable in that way. But even that I think would help, right? If it was just a little introduction by Bilbo at the beginning of each chapter, just saying here was who told me about this and here's some notes on it, right?
Yeah.
And she says, or maybe a story of some other hobbits finding Bilbo's writings and reading it to their children. I don't know why, but I'm not sure I'd be pleased with any attempt to have it with a young Frodo being told the stories. It's as if Frodo should be left alone. Fair enough.
That's fair.
Yeah, maybe poor Frodo just he's had enough attention for one life, so maybe no more for him.
Yeah.
But I like those
Share the
ideas,
love.
Brielle.
Yeah.
I do. So
Good stuff.
For sure.
Yeah. It's fun to think about all the possibilities.
Absolutely. All right, and our last piece of correspondence is from Jennifer, a comment on our last episode, and it's a poem.
Oh.
Here goes. Do my best here, Jennifer. Bingo Bolger Baggins. I knew him well. First he was Bilbo's son, then he became, well, you know the rest, as we all do. Tolkien saved the best for last. Poor Tom Bombadil and Glorfindel and Erkenbrand too. Don't forget Baragond and his son. All of them were left out because Mr. PJ got it into his head that he knew better than the man who wrote the matter. Now we know how this little story grew and grew. Oh, what glory! To read and hear of such delights as Bingo, Marmaduke, and the like.
Oh.
I like it.
It's clever.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So, appreciate it. Appreciate it, Jennifer. Thank you for sharing your poetic talents with us. Yeah, well, for all of those listening, we'd love to hear from you. TolkienRoadPodcast@gmail.com, TolkienRoad.com, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc. So,
yeah.
oh, and Instagram too. Instagram. Yeah.
Oh, are you keeping up with that?
I mean, I'm posting, notifications of episodes over there, so I guess you can call that keeping up. That's about how much I keep up with social media, honestly.
Once a week, that's not too bad.
But if people post things over there, wherever it is, if they're posting things, I try to respond and correspond with people in that particular area. So
cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
For sure. All right. Well, that is it for this episode, everybody.
Okay.
So on our next episode, we will continue our survey of the history of Middle-earth with Volume 8, The War of the Ring, where we will explore the next stage in the development of The Lord of the Rings. So thank you to our amazing patrons, especially the following: Caitlin of Tea with Tolkien,
Lise U,
Andrew T,
John R,
Ms. Anonymous,
Shannon S,
Brian O,
Emilio P,
Zeke F,
James A,
James L,
Chris L,
Chuck F,
Azia V,
Ish of the Hammer,
Teresa C,
David of Pints with Jack,
Jonathan D,
Eric S,
Joey S,
Eric B,
Johanna T,
Mike M,
Duranayer,
Robert H,
Paul D,
Jacob S,
and Julia,
as well as those celebrating their patron anniversary in May: Ms. Anonymous,
Joshua,
Donna S,
Rebecca R,
James R,
and Ty M.
Yeah, and that's Joshua Y.
That is Joshua Y.
Joshua
I got
Y.
very confused. I don't know why.
All good.
I was like, is it Joshua E? No, okay. Yes, Joshua Y. My bad.
That's right.
Yes,
All
thank
right.
you, everyone.
Yes, thanks everybody, and we will talk at you next time.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.